Hello, I'm Jyotika. Welcome to Excelling Psychology. Before paper 1, I had uploaded a practice paper. It was not from past papers, and we had just discussed how to write answers. I had given you common mistakes made by students. I had explained how to avoid those mistakes. Something similar I'm going to do in this video. So, we are going to go through a practice paper. For paper 2, it's not a past paper. I'm sure you must have solved many past papers. So, these questions should be something different for you, and as we know, any type of questions can come. Past papers do not repeat in the paper, so we need to be ready for all types of questions. Also, I would like to always give the disclaimer that this is not a guess paper. I'm not saying that these are the questions that are going to come in the paper. No one can predict what will come. Let's accept that, and let's just be prepared for all sorts of questions. Okay, so I'm going to begin with the first question now. As I solve the questions, I'll be writing sample answers. You do not have to write in the same way, but just to give an idea of how to write. I want you to focus on the content, the organization, and the terminology, what language I use while writing. Also, I will keep pointing out frequently made mistakes on these type of questions and how you can rectify them. Okay, the first question is from the study by Pilyavin et al. Briefly describe what is meant by control in psychological studies. When they give a heading, like by Pilyavin et al., and then they give a general question, what is meant by control in psychological studies? They are not saying in Pilyavin et al. Or in this study. That means they are asking you a general question. As you can see, it's a first part of the question. The next part is there later. So definitely that is where they'll make it specific to Pilyavin et al. Here they have asked it as a general question. What is control in general in psychology? So you need not make it specific to Pilyavin. Just because you've read Pilyavin at the top does not mean you have to give the answer from Pilyavin, because the wording in this study, from this study, something like that will be used when they want a very specific answer. Pilyavin et al., keep it in your mind for the next part of the answer. Okay, so briefly describe what is meant by control. Main mistake I have seen students making is to confuse between control and standardization. So standardization is when you keep things consistent or the same for all participants. Control is something different. Control is when you hold extraneous variables away from the study. So when you do not allow extraneous variables to influence the dependent variable, so that you can see the impact of only the independent variable on the dependent variable. That is what a control is. In our syllabus, we learn it in the experimental contextually, so that is how we need to remember it. How I would answer this question is control refers to prevention of extraneous variables from influencing the dependent variable in a study. This question is worth 2 marks, so definitely only the definition is going to get me 1 mark. I need to add detail. Now, detail can be of my choice because it's a very open question. So, it can be an example of a control that I can give. Need not be from Pilyavin, can be from any course study, or it can be a general example, general control with a hypothetical scenario. Need not be an example. I can also elaborate on the point further. So I can develop the point further by either saying what is the advantage of having control in a study, or how controls are maintained, or talking about which type of extraneous variables can be controlled, like situational and participant variables. Detail we are free to give any of our choice. Right now, I will just extend the point further and explain why control is useful. So, control helps to increase the internal validity of findings of a study. Okay, the next question is specific from the study. Identify two controls in place within the procedure of the study. So here they have directly told you they want it from Pilyavin et al. For this type of a question, it's very important to consider the marks which are allotted, because for 2 marks, you cannot really elaborate on each control, like why it was done, which extraneous variable was prevented, or how that would help to see the effect of IV in isolation on the DV. That will become too much detail. That is something which is worth 4 marks. And also the command term is identify. So they just want us to name two controls which were there. Like we just have to state what were the controls. How and why is not what we need to explain. So one control, if we look at Pilyavin, is definitely that all the team members at a time, the 4 team members who were there, they would enter from separate doors into the car of the train, into the carriage. We have seen why they would do that, so that people would not suspect them as belonging to the same team and then understand that the emergency situation was staged. Like I said, we don't need to give this explanation, but we can remember in our minds and then we can just state that this was a control. In the same way, one more control I remember is that the victim always stood near the pole of the train and in the critical area. That is so that visibility was there, so that people from critical and adjacent areas could clearly see what was happening with the victim, because it was right at the center. Everyone could take a look over there. Again, we don't need to give the explanation for why he was standing near the pole, but the fact that he was always standing near the pole, that makes for a control. So we literally just need to give one sentence on each. So I would say one control was that the 4 assistants of the researcher entered from different doors into the car on any trial. Another was that the victim always stood next to the pool in the critical area to enact the emergency situation. Having written 2 answers, I would like to reiterate that you must check out, when you are learning a lesson from a teacher, the organization of the points, how the points flow, the wording of the answer. By wording, I mean one control is this, another is this. You always signpost the beginning of your sentences. You always lead into the sentences for clarity to the examiner. These might seem like minor things, but they really increase the clarity of your points. Many times students in their mind, they know what they're talking about, but when they put it on the paper, it is beyond comprehension of the examiner. So noticing these things, how the sentences begin, how they end, what language is used, what terminology is used, can really help you score marks. Because after all, to score marks, the examiner is not going to read your mind. In your mind, do you know what the answer is? The examiner is going to read what you present on paper. So as much as it is important to know the content of the study, equally important is to know how to communicate your answers in the paper. That's why paper writing, answer writing practice, going beyond past papers, like of course doing past papers, but the bad habit students have is of taking a past paper and just reading the mark scheme. That is, they, instead of attempting answers on their own. So going beyond past papers and practicing all sorts of answers, that is why it is so important. Because knowing the content in your head, knowing the logic behind things in your head does not get you marks. Conveying answers gets you marks. So always when you are presented with something in a video, see how those answers are being written. Read them carefully. Don't just read, okay, this is one control I need to remember, that's one control I need to remember. The lesson is much more than that. The lesson is also about how to write, how to organize. I know I'm repeating it, but I want to really drive the point into your head. And what terminology to use. All of this you need to notice. How many points to cover. As I'm giving you suggestions, how marks will be allotted, what type of mistakes can be made. The lesson is all about it. Otherwise, even I can just write the answers and upload on my website, which is there. But the reason I'm making this video is to explain a lot of things to you which are very critical in getting marks in the paper. Getting marks in psychology is much, much more than just knowing the content which is there in the textbook or in some notes. Okay, let's move ahead with this paper. We see from 2024 onwards, a lot of core study questions have started coming in paper 2, which is to help you to gain marks, because when in earlier it was dependent a lot much more on unseen scenarios, students would not score well. So take the opportunity and make sure you score very well on paper 2 as well. Here the next question is, in the Holzel et al. Study on mindfulness, data was collected using an MRI brain scan. Describe the purpose of the 2 brain scans that were given to each participant. Your students' tendency would be to uh, club both the MRI scans together as if they had the same purpose. You know, both the scans did not have the same purpose. The first scan was meant to establish a baseline. Before giving mindfulness intervention, only why did they have an MRI scan of the participants? Like, for what? So that they would have a baseline measure against which they could compare any benefits that were derived from mindfulness. So that is the purpose of the first scan which was done. Second scan had a different purpose. That was to see whether MBSR had been effective or not. So to see whether there is an increase in gray matter concentration or not. So you need to explain the purposes separately. Of course, it's just for 2 marks. So with brevity, you have to explain. So like I was saying earlier, some students would club and they would go like sway away from the point. So what they would start describing is why MRI has been used for its objectivity, or because it does not make errors like a human would make error in observations. They have asked you the purpose of MRI. Purpose. What's the reason for using it? They haven't asked you for a strength, advantage, or benefit of using it. That is one more place where, you know, solving practice papers and past papers really help you, because you start decoding the language of the questions. You start learning what the questions indicate, what you're supposed to write. Because what will happen for these type of questions is, many students, they will write a strength, MRI is error free, it increases validity. Later, after the paper, when they come to know, oh, they had asked the purpose, they will say, I knew this answer. I knew why they have done the baseline measure. I knew why they have done the second measure. But because I did not understand the wording of the question, that is why I wrote something else. So to prevent those type of mistakes on your part, like something is being asked for and you're writing something else, that is why practice is very important. How we can answer this question is one sentence for the purpose of each scan which was done. So the first MRI scan was conducted to establish a baseline measure. Again, your students will make a mistake of just leaving it as baseline measure. That answer becomes generic. Baseline measure of what? You always need to complete whatever you write and make it specific to the study. Of gray matter concentration. Also, do not write GMC everywhere. Write the full form. In participants' brains. The second scan was performed to investigate the effectiveness effectiveness would be general, so investigate any increase in gray matter concentration after 8-week practice of mindfulness. Let's look at the next question. This is continuing from Holzel. Suggest one strength of collecting data using these brain scans. Now they have asked you for the strength. One more thing, what happens is students will first write in a haste that MRI is, what is the strength? They'll write that in the previous point. Then when it comes here, they get shocked. Why are they asking for the strength again? They aren't asking you again. First, they've asked you for the purpose. Or some students will realize at this point, oh, there I was not to write the strength, I was to write the purpose. Again, practice is very important for that. And secondly, one thing you can do is just read both the questions, both parts of a question when a question is in parts before attempting the first one. That can also prevent you from making such errors. Collecting data using brain scans. What benefit it has? Mainly error-free measurement, unbiased measurement, because it is scientific equipment, it's physiological measurement. Of course, you have to make the point specific. They have asked from Holzel. They have given you a context to refer to. They have mentioned wholesale. They don't want in general. You can give a general point and then link it to wholesale. But some linkage has to be there. Just giving a very generic point in general, brain scans are error free. In this study, what type of error free measurement was done? You'll have to explain that. So let's see a sample answer. One strength is unbiased measurement, increasing validity of findings. Hulzel et al. Were able to measure benefits of mindfulness on gray matter concentration without any bias in this study. So this is how we make it relevant to the study. Okay, let's come to the next set of questions. Okay, now this is a general question. Describe two types of observations using any two course studies as examples. When they tell us we have to use course studies as examples, means we have to. We cannot use general examples. They have been very clear, course studies. If instead of course studies they would have just said examples, then you could have used general examples or course studies, then you would have a choice. It's for 6 marks, and so whenever we have a 6 mark, I've explained in my previous videos, I'll just quickly explain again. Two types of observation for 6 marks. In your mind first really become clear that one type of observation is worth 3 marks, so that you do not give unequal weightage to the both types of observations you are mentioning. Otherwise, what students do is they lose sight of the fact that it's for 6 marks, so both will be equally rewarded. And then what they start doing is they uh, give too much elaboration on one of the observations which they know well, and in the process they leave very little room for the other one, and the answer becomes unbalanced. So avoid doing that. When they've asked for two types of observation, prepare a quick outline in your mind or you're on the paper also, and then only begin writing. That's a very good practice. Think about how you'll justify 3 marks for each. So of course the typical structure is that first you should define each type. So for the first one, you'd give a definition. For the second one, you can give an example that is compulsory also from the course study. And then you can further elaborate on that example itself, or you can give some additional point about the type of observation made. Now, how to organize the answer is your choice. Some students like to go back and forth between the two types of observation. So they give the definition of the first one, then the second one, then the example of the first one, then the second one. Absolutely fine, acceptable. It's a good way of writing. But the way I prefer of writing is like first I will just cover one type of observation entirely, all the points I've planned for that, and then the next type of observation. There are many types of observations. We know there are 4 classifications in the syllabus. One is based on setting, naturalistic versus controlled. The other is based on awareness of participants, covert versus overt. The other is based on involvement of the researcher with participants, that's participant and non-participant. And the last one is the planning that goes into the observation. So we have structured or unstructured. We can take any, I'll just take structured and unstructured for now. So one course study in which I know there was structured observation is Hassett et al. So I'd like to take that. And one study in which I know there was unstructured observation is Milgram. So I would like to take that. So first, like I told you, I will cover structured observation entirely and then I'll move towards unstructured. I personally do not like the back and forth format. Okay. One type of observation is structured observation. You are not going to get marks just for naming it. The definition will be included in the mark rewarded, in which behaviors to be observed are predetermined before conduct of the study. Okay, for another point to elaborate further, I'll say it typically involves the use of a checklist. To mark off or rate behaviors. For example, in the Fagin et al. Study, in the Hassett et al. Study, behaviors like sitting, were predetermined on the checklist and defined as sitting on part or whole of the toy. A couple of things here. One, in your examples also you can take a breadth versus depth approach. So you could give 2 or 3 examples of behaviors which were there on the checklist, but to emphasize like how the behaviors are predetermined along with their definitions. I like to give one behavior and just give the definition along with that. Instead of that, you can give 2 3 examples like sitting, grasping, holding, and not explain any of them. That's also fine. Also, one more thing that I wanted to say was, when I'm writing on the screen, it's very different from writing on the exam paper. So sometimes I run out of space when I'm writing, so I have to exceed the lines. Many students feel that the answer is unnecessarily long because of that. Please do not judge how much writing space you have on the paper from what you're seeing on the screen. You will definitely have more space to accommodate your answer. Also, like I always say, do not go by superficialities like how much space is being taken or what length is there of the answer. Please do not be preoccupied with those things when you're watching the video. There are many things which are way more important, such as what is the content, organization, structuring of the answer. Please keep your focus on that if you want to score well. As long as you're preoccupied with superficialities, you're not going to be learning or taking away anything from the lesson. So now I have covered till here what is structured observation. Now coming to unstructured observation. Another type is unstructured observation. This reminds me of one more thing. When they say 2 types of observation, do we need to give both the observations from the same classification? Like, do we have to give structured and unstructured, covert and overt? That is not specified. So I can take one observation from the planning classification, which is structured, and the other observation from, say, the participant awareness classification, which is covert or overt. Any 2 combinations. If I leave aside the classifications and I consider how many types of observation are there in the syllabus, there are 8 types. Literally any two, any combination of two I can pick up, because they haven't asked me to pick up from the same classification. Okay, so I'm just taking structured and unstructured, not necessary. I can take, for example, say covert observation, and I can use the same example. Hassett et al. CCTV cameras were used to record what the monkeys were doing. So it was covert observation. That's perfectly acceptable. It's your choice what you want to give. So another type is unstructured observation, in which behaviors to be recorded are spontaneously decided at time of observation. I can say that does not involve the use of a checklist. Perfectly good point. Instead of that, I would just like to say the researcher uses their own judgment to deem some behaviors important while observing. So, this is how I like to elaborate. In the Milgram study, signs of distress amongst participants while administering shocks such as trembling, nervous laughter, biting their lips, etc., was spontaneously noted. I want you to check out the clarity in the examples. I want you to check out how I have given very specific behaviors in the example. I've not just said, for example, Hassett et al. Used structured observation. For example, Milgram used unstructured observation. Those examples are not credit worthy, because just saying that it is used in a study, just naming that isn't sufficient. Example means actually pointing out in the study where, how that type of observation has been used. That's a complete example. So that's why, like I've told you before, I'd like to reiterate that in the video, when you're learning from a video and not just the text, listen to the pointers which I'm giving you as I'm writing. Take that advice. That is what will help you in answer writing. Memorizing anyways is not helpful in psychology. The questions always formulated differently. So learning this answer by rote is going to give you nothing. Even if you're just reading the answer, say from my website, or you're pausing the video and reading, look at the how of the answer. Don't look at the what of the answer. The what is anyways there. The content is anyways there in the textbook. The reason you're doing answer practice or learning about answer writing is to look at the how. How is it done? That is what you need to pick up to score well in psychology. Psychology is a skill based paper. No matter how much people want you to believe that psychology is about rote learning, it's just a lot of content and nothing else. That's a very sorry way of looking at the subject. That's a very demeaning way of looking at it. It's definitely not about rote learning or fact learning. It's a lot about communication, writing skills, and that is your approach. When you take that to the paper, that is when you score well. Okay, let's look at the next question. Okay, the next question is based on types of hypothesis. In our syllabus, we have two types of hypothesis: experimental and correlational. Students sometimes make a lot of mistakes when it comes to hypothesis, so make sure you have learned the topic well. For each type of hypothesis noted below, they provide a brief description and your own example related to time spent revising, course studies, and exam scores. So what they've done here is they have given you two variables and they want you to formulate hypothesis incorporating those variables only in your example. So when they say your own example, if you don't read the question carefully and you leave it at that and you give any example, that will not count. They have named the variables which you have to include. So read the question fully. Also, it's very good thing the structure you have to give is implied in the question itself. They want a brief definition, so that's going to be one sentence for every point, and the example of including those variables, that's going to be the second point in every answer. Okay, the first thing to determine according to our syllabus, because we just have correlational and experimental hypothesis, is do I have to write a correlational or an experimental hypothesis looking at the nature of the variable? So they have, let's first in our mind point out the variables. Time spent revising course studies. That's 1. And exam score is 2. So these are the 2 variables. Now, are these co-variables or are these independent and dependent variables? There's no clarity on that. Like they haven't indicated that these are related to each other, one is impacting the other. So we are kind of free to take it in whichever way we want. As of now, this is looking to me like a typical correlational example, so I'm taking it that way. But when I'm writing, I'll explain to you how you could have written instead if you were taking it from an experimental point of view. Okay, directional one-tailed hypothesis by definition for a correlation is that which specifies that there is a definite correlation between the variables, in the sense it gives the direction of the correlation as well, whether it's going to be positive, negative, or zero. So it gives the type of correlation. How I would define it is, this hypothesis specifies the type of correlation predicted between two variables. Covariables. If instead of this I was taking it from an experimental point of view, I would have written this hypothesis specifies the exact impact of the independent variable on the dependent variable, or even better, this hypothesis specifies which condition will show better or worse performance than the other in an experiment, that way. Now, to give an example from the variables, to use those variables and formulate the example, I would say, for example, there is a positive, I'll put it in quotes to indicate that this is the example hypothesis. There is a significant positive correlation between time spent revising course studies and exam scores. If it was an experimental hypothesis instead, I would have proposed it as there is a significant difference in exam scores between those who spend more time revising course studies and those who spend less time revising course studies. As simple as that. Here, one thing which always comes up is, what if I give the wrong type of correlation? What if I say there's a negative correlation? Doesn't matter at all. They are not looking for correctness or accuracy of the relation predicted, because there's no actual study which is given. Possible people are spending more time, they're getting less marks on the exam because there's more of an inverse relationship between the two. Anyways, not straying away, coming to the point, positive or negative or zero, whatever correlation you specify, even if it's not logically correct or not empirically correct, that's fine. Because it's directional, what is important, what they're looking out for is that you've mentioned the word positive, negative, or zero. You have given some specifier, that is important. Whether it's right or wrong is quite immaterial. So don't worry about those things. Make sure you're not omitting the specifier, because then it doesn't remain a directional hypothesis, then it becomes non-directional. So just be careful about how you're wording the example. Don't worry about accuracy. In the same way, we have to answer the remaining two, so I'll just go by it quickly. Okay, so coming to non-directional hypothesis, this hypothesis does not specify type of correlation expected between two variables. In case of experiment, it does not specify which condition will perform better or worse than the other, or it does not specify what direction of difference will be there between two groups or conditions. So an example of this would be, there is a significant correlation between time spent revising course studies and exam score. If instead it was an experimental hypothesis, I would say there is a significant difference between those who spend more time revising and those spending less time revising on exam score. What is important is to not specify which type of correlation is there. So simply saying not to use the words positive, negative, or zero while formulating the hypothesis. Finally, coming to null hypothesis. This hypothesis predicts no relationship between two variables. If it was an experimental study, it predicts no difference between two conditions or groups of an experiment, or it's a hypothesis of no effect, or it's a hypothesis of no impact of the independent variable on the dependent variable. Here the example would be, there is no correlation between the variables given If it was experimental, I would just say there's no significant difference between people who spend time revising course studies more and time spent revising less course studies on exam scores. Okay, so this is how we can answer the hypothesis question. Let's quickly look at the next one. Probably the next one will be the last one I can address on this video. This is an unseen scenario type of question. Sarah wants to conduct a study to see whether her puppy learns the command of sit faster when using crunchy or chewy treats during training. When we read this, only the first thing comes to mind is this is an experiment, because there are two conditions which are specified. She plans to start her training using crunchy treats for the first 2 days and chewy, then use treats for the next 2 days. Means she'll use the chewy treats the next 2 days. Suggest one problem with Sarah's plan for treating her puppy. When they say one problem and they don't specify whether they want it to be methodological or ethical, you are free to take any. If you want to think ethically, you can think about any distress that could be caused to the puppy because of the nature of a procedure. If you want to think methodologically, you can think about the GRAVE. The acronym GRAVE. Is there an issue with generalizability, reliability, ethics, application, or validity of her study? Okay, don't take ethics, just take it till validity. So, it's a typical experiment. She wants to compare whether crunchy or chewy treats will have more effect on the puppy's speed of learning. Now, the confounding which I can see here very clearly, potential confounding, is from the fact that the first 2 days she's going to be using crunchy treats and then chewy treats. Instead of randomizing the order of giving crunchy and chewy treats, what she has done is she has set aside 2 specific days, the initial days for one and then the 2 days for the other one. There, the confounding that comes is from the time of training. In the first 2 days, if the puppy is going to learn how to sit because he's eating crunchy treats. Then in the next 2 days, he's already learned how to respond to the command sit. So won't he be faster in the next 2 days by virtue of just having learned before, what we call practice effect? He will have gained practice when he was taking the crunchy treats that time. So I think very obvious problem is practice effects, which we can clearly identify from the fact that it's repeated measures design. And like I said, there's no attempt to randomize the order of the treats being given. So that's what comes to my mind methodologically. In my previous video also, which was for paper 1, I've explained my bent is towards giving methodological issues, though most students have a bent towards giving ethical issues. Now, when it comes to ethical issues, there are two things. If you're taking ethical issues, one, that's why I don't recommend is students are not clear with ethics. Human and animal ethics are entirely different. That's why there are two separate chapters also in any textbook which you take. So they will take this study, which is for an animal, it's about a puppy, and they will give some human guideline to justify their point, which is absolutely going to be marked as incorrect. That's one thing. Second thing is not knowing the names of the guidelines properly. Especially, I don't know, I think because in schools, like in classes, a lot is discussed about human ethics. So students know human ethical guideline names well. They know the names well. I'm not saying they know the meaning of the guideline correctly, but they know the names like informed consent, privacy, confidentiality, lack of deception. But when it comes to animal guidelines, they don't even know the names. So they're going to write about some ethic without even naming the guideline, which won't give clarity to the examiner what they're talking about. Also, they misidentify. This is something I've explained in the last video. I will not come to it again. Making up stories and giving for ethics, assuming anything will happen, and based on a very hypothetical scenario talking about ethics. So, in this scenario, read carefully. Do you think any distress is being caused to the puppy? Because, as far as I see, the puppy is just being rewarded with treats. Both crunchy and chewy are treats which are being given. So in terms of reward deprivation and aversive stimuli, I'm seeing that the guideline is being followed very well. Like the puppy is getting reward regardless of what is happening. So I don't see it as a problem. If you do see some ethical problem in this, I'm not able to see right now. Make sure you can justify with the correct animal ethical guideline. So I will take the practice effect issue which I had raised. Only for 2 marks I have to give it, but with relevance to the context. Again, every time I have to say this, but I will because it's the key thing in scoring. When they give you a context, when they give you a scenario, of course they want you to contextualize your answer. Otherwise, directly they would have asked you what's the problem of validity, what is the problem with repeated measures design, what are practice effects. Why bother to talk about Sarah and her puppy and the treats and all? So when you write answers like practice effects would be there which would reduce validity. You don't even talk about Sarah the puppy. You make no attempt to contextualize the answer. How do you think you're going to score on that? But maximum answers look like that. So make sure you contextualize. So how I would write this answer is practice effects could occur as the puppy. Now see how I'm connecting it with the scenario. Would gain practice in sitting fast in response to the command on the first 2 days, then it would be able to respond faster on the next 2 days, not because of the treat, but because of practice, reducing validity. So that is how we contextualize, explain what is the meaning of practice, not just write practice and leave it without suggesting what impact it is having in the situation. Suggest an alternative way to train the puppy to address the potential problem you mentioned in part A. I think in the process only I gave the answer that there should be randomization of the order of treats being given. So alternately, in random order, the puppy could be given chewy treats and crunchy treats, and then finally she could take a test on to which one he's responding faster, something like that. That is one possibility. Another possibility to overcome practice effect would be to maybe space apart the training for a long duration, like have a long gap in between, so that the puppy cannot remember, uh, maintain that practice which that puppy has gained in the crunchy treats towards the chewy treats. That could be one more thing. Or another option altogether is to overthrow the experimental design altogether. So instead of having repeated measures design, having an independent measure design in which there are two separate puppies which are equivalent, or preferably even more puppies. One group of puppies gets only the chewy treat, the other one gets only the crunchy treat. So then order effects are not an issue because they are two separate groups, and then we just see which one responds better. So there are many possible solutions. Let's take randomization for now. The first one which came to my mind, I would like to proceed with that. Randomization of the order of giving type of treats to the puppy could be a solution. What you need to notice is that it is worth 3 marks. You really need to explain the how part of it. You can't just give the solution in 2 steps. At least you should explain how the solution will be implemented. And preferably use wording from the scenario. So Sarah could alternately provide the puppy with a crunchy or chewy treat while training it to respond to the command term. Then she could test the puppy after a few trials by giving each type of treat and recording speed of response. They've really asked for the how if we go to see, not for the why. Like how she could have done the alternative procedure. Like one alternative way just means how. So I'm not getting into the strengths and weaknesses for this one. Alright. Now coming to the next one, explain why it would be better for Sarah to conduct her study with a wider sample of puppies. I think again in the process I have explained this, that when I had suggested maybe there could be one puppy like an independent measures design. What could be helpful is if she could have a larger group of puppies. Here, the way they've asked it is because generalizability would increase. When it comes to this particular puppy, now to be specific to the context, this puppy could have some natural flair for faster learning or slower learning, faster or slower response. Not necessarily all puppies would be able to respond as fast or as slow as this puppy in the population. So having representation of a few more puppies could really help her to generalize to the entire population of puppies. So typical generalizability, what we explain, we have to give that only. So it would be better because the particular puppy that Sarah is training could be inherently fast or slow in responding to commands. Representing a wider sample would help generalize results to puppies of all natural speed in the population. All right, so now I'm sorry, but I'm in a rush to leave. So that is how much I can cover for today. If you have any comments, questions about this video, any suggestions of which type of videos you'd like to see further, you can leave them in the comments box below. If you're looking for tuition for psychology, private tuition, you can contact me on my email ID given below or WhatsApp me on the number given below. So that's it for today. Thank you for watching and all the best for your paper. Bye.